Hi, everybody. Gene Richards here, attorney from the Williams Law Group, back on the Navigating DCPP podcast, the podcast where we break down complex issues involving the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, or DCPP. On today's episode, we're going to discuss the difference between child neglect and child abuse. Neglect versus abuse. What is the difference? Before I begin on that topic, I want to remind you all out there that no information that I share on this podcast will create an attorney-client relationship, but we do welcome any person involved with DCPP to contact our office for a confidential consultation with our team. So what is the difference between child abuse and child neglect? First of all, child abuse typically means that there was intentional harm or actions that placed a child at risk of harm. For example, physical abuse, excessive corporal punishment, hitting, causing bruising, shaking, burning, things that are done physically. Emotional abuse, such as threatening, belittling, constant name-calling, any behavior that may damage a child's sense of safety and self-worth. Sexual abuse, sexual activity with a child or exposing a child to sexual acts or materials. Abuse is something that a parent or caregiver or an adult really does that directly harms or could harm the child. What is neglect? Neglect, on the other hand, is about what a parent, caregiver, really any adult, fails to do. It's the absence of action that leaves a child without proper care or protection. Neglect can show up in many ways, leaving a young child alone at home for a long period of time, or not providing adequate supervision. For example, being left in the car when you're in the store, failing to provide food, clothing, or safe shelter, ignoring medical needs, failing to ensure a child goes to school consistently. Unlike abuse, neglect does not always happen out of malicious intent. Neglect can stem from poverty, not having the funds, the money to provide food, clothing, or safe shelter. Stress, a parent's going through a lot, either at job or at home, and maybe didn't make the appropriate decision based on that stress, or just an overall lack of resources. Perhaps didn't have support to watch a child and had to go to work and therefore left that child at home based on really feeling that they had no other option but to do that. So as you can see, neglect and abuse are quite different. There's different definitions, obviously, but also different topics and types of referrals, right? We talked about with abuse, you have physical abuse and emotional abuse and sexual abuse, while neglect is failing to provide adequate shelter, food, medical care, education, supervision. So they do differ quite substantially in terms of what they mean and then what kind of referrals stem from abuse versus neglect. And it's difficult sometimes as a parent to really know, where does my case fall? What's the referral really mean? Because when you get a referral or you're in court or even get a finding letter from DCPP, it mentions a finding of abuse and or neglect, or there's a referral of abuse and or neglect. Well, which one is it? And the issue is that as a parent, a guardian, someone who's involved in DCPP, you may not understand what you're even looking at. What's this complaint saying? What's this finding letter saying? Neglect, abuse? How do I defend against one versus the other? Am I being alleged of doing? And oftentimes, as a parent, someone who's not a lawyer, it's difficult to know what's even happening in a case. What's being alleged? Why is the finding against me, and for what purpose has it been made? And so it's flawed in many ways because it's confusing. These letters come in and you're not really sure, well, did I abuse? Did I neglect? It says neglect and or abuse. A complaint comes in. We're going to court tomorrow. It says that I did something, but I'm not sure if it means neglect or abuse. So it's important to understand these definitions and what type of referral is being made so you can appropriately defend yourself, or have your lawyer, for that matter, defend yourself in court. And obviously, we as an office who handle DCPP cases across the entire state of New Jersey, we can help explain to you what the allegation actually is, and then strategize how to appropriately respond to the allegation and defend yourself against that allegation. So with us having knowledge of these definitions and these different places where you find these allegations, whether it be physical, emotional, sexual, substance abuse, if it's just, or it's just a neglect, inadequate supervision, a failure to provide certain things like medical needs or medication or education, we're able to kind of at that point figure out, okay, we know what's happening here. We know what's being alleged, how to define it, and how do we best approach our case strategy to defend against that information, that allegation. I'll give you a brief example here. I mentioned it actually a few minutes ago, a little bit with my example about supervision or inadequate supervision. I've had a client and many clients who are between a rock and a hard place, as they say. This client had to work. Mom and dad were not together. It was dad's parenting time. He then went to drop off the child's daughter at mom's house because it was now to be her parenting time. Mom, for some reason, was not home, and so my client took the child back and went to his place. That morning, he had to go to work. He had no support nearby to assist. It wasn't even his parenting time at that time. It was supposed to be mom's parenting time, which he tried to exchange and take his daughter to mom's house, but she just wasn't there, didn't answer the door. And so my client, stressed, confused, not sure what to do, made the wrong decision. I will say that, right? Left his young child at home by herself. And in doing that, as you might imagine, DCPP got involved and then were claimed or filed a complaint that our client neglected his daughter. But the issue was that the complaint is more broad. It was child abuse and or neglect. This happened on this day, and we're now concerned. So in reading the complaint as a layperson, it's difficult to really know, well, is this abuse? Is this neglect? You're DCPMP, and therefore you care about abuse only, right? No, it's about neglect as well. And in this instance, it was important to realize, like, look, to our client, while you didn't abuse your daughter, right, this is still a concern. And here's why. And here's what has to happen to address this concern and not have it happen again. Look, sometimes you have to admit, yes, I made a mistake. I did the wrong thing. And oftentimes when you hear abuse, right, it's more difficult to say, maybe I did mess up here. Maybe I did have a lack of judgment and did the wrong thing. Even neglect, you think, I don't neglect my child. I'm a loving parent who cares, provides, does all I can do for my child. But in this situation, neglect did happen. He left a child who was too young and then got into dangerous things in the home while he went to work. Now, he did return. We didn't expect it because we got a call about what was going on and police got involved. But long story short, this was neglect. We defined to the client what happened here, why it's a concern. Look, we're not saying you abused your child. That's not what's being alleged here or what's defined here. But the lack of supervision, failing to provide that adequate supervision is neglect and can't happen again. And by being able to explain to the client or to any parent for that matter with DCPMP what the referral is about, how to define it, kind of what overarching umbrella it's under. Is it neglect, abuse? If it's abuse, what kind of abuse? If it's neglect, what kind of neglect? When you pinpoint kind of, okay, look, here's the concern, here's the issues, here's what was done that was not right, and here's how to fix it and make it right, it allows for a case to go fairly smooth. And I'll tell you what I mean by that, because in this case specifically, a mistake was made. We agreed, we let our client know, like, look, you messed up here. Let's find a way to get the appropriate training or have support in place so it doesn't happen again, right? Get some parenting classes, get some resources, have a plan in place so that if this happens again, you have a backup plan. Okay, well, if mom's not home, maybe a grandparent can watch my daughter, maybe a close friend, a neighbor. Make a plan B, plan C, plan D, just to ensure that if this happens again, for whatever reason, you have a plan in place. And by appropriately discussing the concerns and then the course of action from those concerns, it allowed for our case to be open and shut rather quickly. We told the division, yes, look, this happened. Here's what my client has done to address that concern. He's learning. He's not running from this. He's accepting it. He knows it wasn't the right thing to do, and he's taking classes to learn. He has a plan in place. By being proactive, right, when you know what's being alleged, and look, sometimes, unfortunately, allegations are true. We can't always say that nothing happened. Nothing has happened, right? It's like having a positive alcohol screen. You have 10 of positive screens, and you tell the court, Oh, Judge, I don't drink. There's 10 false positives. Let's be a little realistic here, right? You messed up, you're getting better, you're getting right. It won't happen again, or you're working towards it not happening ever again, right? You're improving each day as a parent, as a person. And in this case, because we were able to pinpoint to the client in layman's terms, look, this is what's being alleged. It's neglect. I'm not saying you abused your daughter, but it is neglect. And here's why, by definition, it is neglect. You were not appropriately supervising your daughter. Here's why it was wrong by law, by statute. Here's how we can address the issue and make sure it does not happen ever again. Therefore, getting DCPMP out of your life. And in this case, we get the client in the appropriate classes or appropriate resources. We provide the client with information as to kind of how to put the appropriate parameters and plan in place so it does not happen again. And he has been on the right path ever since. He's learned from the mistake. It has not happened again. DCPMP has no concerns about him. There is no supervision occurring. There are no restrictions. DCPMP says, wow, you accepted the mistake because no one's perfect. You realize that, yes, it was neglect, and you admitted what happened because you were advised as to kind of what that really means. When we know what words mean, we can better come to a conclusion in our own minds. Like, okay, if neglect means this, by definition, I did that. Well, okay, I did it, right? If you think neglect is like, oh, well, I feed my child every day, right? And that's part of it, but there's different parts to the definition, different examples of what neglect is. So you oftentimes have people that come, and say, my child has a home and they eat. Yeah, well, in this case, also the child had a roof over her head and she ate, but there's different levels to this, right? In this situation, there was inadequate supervision, which by definition is going to be neglect. And by being able to differentiate what these words mean and what allegations fall under those different definitions, it's easier to step back, make appropriate decisions on a case, and move the case forward as quickly as possible. So in this case, we define to the client, to the parent, what these words mean, what happened here. When you know what the words mean, you can say as a parent, as a person, okay, by definition, that's right. I was neglectful. And by being able to not fight back when facts are facts, this client, this parent was able to address the issue and get DCPMP off his back. And so it's important as a parent to know what these words mean, know what's being alleged, and then based on the definitions and the allegations, make an appropriate decision as to what has to happen next. Look, not every time do we say, no, 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 I'm not doing that. You're all wrong. Now, of course, there are cases like that. But sometimes DCPMP is involved for a reason. There is a problem. There is help that is needed. A parent needs to have treatment or counseling or needs to be taught just how to better parent. There's nothing wrong with that. We can all use help in some way, or no one's a perfect parent. But of course, in terms of the law, having DCPMP involved doesn't mean you are perfect or imperfect. It just means that you are perhaps in some way inadequate, allegedly, right? Now, it's not always the case, of course. Many times DCPMP is involved, and in my opinion, should not be. But in a case like this, there was neglect. The facts supported that. What happened, happened. And because my client knew what that word meant and realized, well, if that's the definition, then they got me. It allowed him to process that and make an appropriate decision on his case moving forward. Now, as always, I do want to just thank you all for joining the podcast, for listening. Feel free to share, subscribe, tell your friends, your family. I'd be happy to have anyone listen, to allow them to have the resources and the information if they are ever involved in a DCPMP matter. We also have resources and support on our website. Feel free to call us for additional support or help in DCPMP matters. I just want to, again, recap quickly what happened on today's episode, right? The idea that there are different reasons or different allegations that come from a DCPMP case, right? Neglect or abuse. And how do they differ? Well, abuse is more something that was done by a parent, physical, emotional, sexual, while neglect is more something that was not done, right? Providing shelter, supervision, medication, education. So it's important to know what those words mean so that you know what DCPMP is alleging and how to best respond to that allegation. Speaking of abuse or neglect, on next week's episode, we're going to discuss substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, or even medication that's being abused, and how that substance use can threaten your custody. And of course, in that same vein, have DCP&P involved with you and your family. So we'll talk about that next week. Until then, have a great week.